If you go into teaching because you love your subject, you will find quickly that you can't stay there. Like, it has to be about the relationships with the students. And I think I naively went into my first English class saying, I love these books, you should love them too. But that was all about me, and it wasn't about my students.
Welcome to TLC Connections, the podcast where educators, counselors, coaches, and community leaders come together to inspire change, one connection at a time.
Hi, welcome to TLC Connections podcast. My name is Julie Knudsen, and I'll be your host today. And I'm really excited to have Dr. Deborah Broderick with us today. Dr. Broderick is an educator, researcher, and program coordinator with over 2 decades of experience preparing future teachers. She leads the Secondary Education Academy at Central Montco Technical High School in Montgomery County, where high school students gain hands-on classroom experience and college credit as they explore careers in education. Holding a doctorate in reading, writing, and literacy from the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Broderick is passionate about critical literacy, culturally responsive teaching, and inspiring the next generation of educators. So, Deb, thank you again so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I think we'll just jump right in. I'm really curious to hear what it's like educating future educators. I have to be honest, I started my career as a 5th grade teacher and know the challenges of education and teaching. So can you tell me a little bit about your journey and how you got into this field?
Well, I actually started as an English teacher. I'm not sure if you knew that. I taught high school English first, and then I ended up at an alternative education school, the Chester County Middle College High School, where I was also teaching English, creative writing, poetry workshop, graphic arts, and art. And I think it was there that I really started to think about teaching in a different kind of way. And so I guess I taught up until 2009. I was either teaching English or art. And in 2009, I made the switch to working with future educators. And basically, when I was working at the alternative school, I was working with at-risk youth who had been identified as students who had drug and alcohol issues or mental health issues, and they were really disengaged from school. They had sort of come from either the high school where they were not being successful, or they had been in placement and they came to us through that avenue. And so I had all of these methods for teaching English and the electives that I was teaching, and they were completely falling flat. Like everything that I was doing was just not working. And I was like, I don't know what to do next. And that's kind of where I really delved into arts-based practices and arts-based pedagogy. And it was through that experience that really changed how I saw education.
Can you break that down a little bit for the average guy? Some big words, but what does that mean? And how did you introduce the arts?
So basically I almost fell into it, really. So my master's is actually in poetry, so I'm a writer. And so I've always had a creative practice of my own. But as part of this very small alternative ed school, all of the core teachers were asked to pick things that they were interested in to do electives with the students in the afternoon. So I naturally picked a writing elective, like a creative writing elective. And what I noticed with the kids who signed up was that they were way more engaged in the elective than they were in my English class in the morning. And they were incredibly talented. They were talented artists, musicians, painters. And I started to learn a lot from them. And I built an art curriculum based out of what my students were teaching me. And so I just scoured the internet and tried to find other teachers who were teaching art, because that was actually not my certification. And I learned from my students. And so engaging with the arts became a way in. It was like the access door into engaging these students in school again. And I started to see that an arts-based practice had benefits across curriculum. And that I could incorporate it, and that it would actually be motivating, engaging to students in a way that I hadn't thought about before. And that became my research area of focus when I went to get my doctorate at Penn.
And were you still in the classroom at that time? So when did you make the switch saying, I know now how to connect with students or learn from them, which I think is really beautiful, hearing their voices, to getting out of the classroom and teaching teachers?
So that also sort of came over time. So I went and started my coursework. At the time, I thought that I was going to focus primarily on alternative ed students and using arts-based practices in that particular setting. I went for a year on a sabbatical to start my coursework, and then I came back into the classroom. So it took me 6 years to get my doctorate, and 5 of those years I was working full-time, which is why it kind of took me a while.
Right.
But when I came back into the classroom, I moved into a different career and tech ed school, and I met another educator. Her name is Kathy Moody. She had been a longtime teacher, and she was doing a teacher academy type program at that school. I had become very, very interested in teacher education in my coursework at Penn, and really thinking about how I could train teachers in arts-based practices as a way to connect with students across curriculum as an arts integrated approach. And so I was thinking about how could I do that in a teacher education program. At that time, our program exploded, very, very different than now. So at the time, that was around 2009. And we had, at that time, I think like 100 applicants per every teacher job at that point. And so our program had exploded, and we had 60 students, 60 future educators in the program. And there was room for me, and I made the switch at that point. And I decided to change my dissertation research to specifically think about how an arts integrated approach in a teacher education program could lead to valuable generative inquiry for future teachers.
So how has that been? How have you integrated that, and how are you educating and inspiring future teachers when it's such a difficult job?
Yeah, and I mean, things have changed over the years. There's a huge teacher shortage now, which we could talk about later maybe. But I've been doing that arts integrated approach in a teacher education program now since about 2012. So all of my students keep a sketchbook. They use the sketchbook to document their journey in the program, and they use it as a means to explore like pretty difficult issues in education, and they do that through the arts. So in my own research, what I've discovered is that when you invite students to use the arts in that particular way, it leads to a deeper metaphorical thinking about issues. And so, for example, if they're just writing about something that they see out in the field, and then they take what they write and then they deepen that through visualization, it leads to a deeper understanding about what's going on in the classroom. So I developed a framework for having students use the arts to examine difficult issues of teaching and learning in the classroom.
So can you share, I'm curious, what are some of those issues that are challenging that students are identifying, which is interesting?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of times I'm asking students to do a sketchbook assignment based on something they've read or something that they've seen in the classroom. So a great example would be one of my students, so all of my students do 3 7-week internships. They get about 100 hours per year in the field before they even go to college, which is amazing. So they're seeing so much. But in that process, they're reflecting on their own schooling and their own experiences, and they're figuring out, what kind of teacher do I want to become? What am I noticing about the classrooms that I used to sit in now that I'm also thinking about teaching? So a lot of my students request to go to their former teachers for their internship. And this one student, Blair, she requested to go back to her middle school ELA teacher. So as part of that experience, I'm having them reflect visually in their sketchbook on that experience. And one of the things that she noticed was teacher favoritism and bias in the classroom, something that we had been talking about in our program, in the dual enrollment component, the college part of our course and program. She hadn't noticed this prior. She hadn't thought about it in this particular way. She noticed that her teacher looked exactly like her, that she was a blonde, white woman, and Blair is a young, blonde, white future teacher. And her teacher loved her. And she noticed that when she went back in as an intern, that the teacher seemed to favor students that looked like her personally. And she noticed that there were other students in the room who were isolated. And so in her field notes, she was writing about like the way that the kids were talking about school. And so she had picked up on a fact that one of the students who was isolated said, my teacher doesn't love me. My teacher doesn't have conversations with me about my life. And then another student who looked very similar to the teacher was having conversations about their life, their family, things that they connected on. And so it brought up this conversation about favoritism and what kind of impact that has on students. And so she created in her sketchbook, she used the metaphor of road signs. So she created these like yield signs, like proceed cautiously with the yellow. And then she created these stop signs where it was like stop, no go. And then she had all the things that the students said around these pieces. And that was her interpretation of what was going on in the classroom. So she was really thinking deeply about what she was seeing in the field, and using art as a way to express a little bit more deeply what was going on.
It's so interesting. I would be curious too if you can even think of another issue, because that's really interesting for young students. You're talking about high school students to observe that. But a side question, it sounds so interesting, but what if you say, I'm not an artist. I don't want to sketch.
They all said that.
Okay.
They all said that. That was actually one of the themes that came out of my research was I am not an artist. And I think that I approached that in many ways. In my original research, I approached that I brought teaching artists into the classroom to support what we were doing. So they were getting some instruction. So I have a longstanding collaboration with the Fabric Workshop Museum in Philadelphia. And so each year I would write a grant and I would bring 1 to 2 teaching artists into the classroom. They would come monthly and they would teach my students techniques so that they could feel a little more successful. They still said, I'm not an artist. Mm-hmm. Even the student that I just spoke about, in her sketchbook, which is supposed to be like a free brainstorming space, a messy space, she did all of her drafts outside of her sketchbook. And then I noticed that she was taping them into the sketchbook because she really couldn't let go of the idea that work she wasn't submitting wasn't perfect, which was actually a very common theme for, it was the exact opposite of what was happening in the alternative school where my students were embracing that approach. When I came in and started doing it with future teachers, their questions were, where's the rubric? How am I being graded on this? I'm not an artist.
Give me the learning objective.
They were very concrete about it. And so that was something that I learned through that original research. So I now have a very like fleshed out way of bringing them to a place where they feel successful and also having them let go of the idea that they need a rubric for everything. They had to unlearn that part of the process. And so now I've been working with teaching artists for, I think, 18 years. And I myself am an artist, so I have techniques that I can now, I don't necessarily have to have teaching artists come in now. I'm able to teach those art techniques. So one of the things that I did realize was that you can't just ask people to make art if they haven't done art in a really long time. You have to provide ways for them to feel successful, because even if you said, I'm really interested in your idea and don't worry about the quality, we're all worried about our quality. We all don't want to do something that we think is terrible. And so there needs to be a balance between working with an idea and teaching a skill, like particular art skills. So we end
all
up
that
doing
relational
both.
ability, and we'll get into that. I know you've been studying restorative practices and but that comes back to the safety and community and relationship. Mm-hmm. So when a student expresses themselves through art, through that sketch, is that something, my words, like unpack? Do you discuss that? Do you share that?
Yes. We do gallery walks. Mm-hmm. So I use it as a way to teach feedback and how to give meaningful feedback. So all of my students get a sticky note pack, the ones with the lines. We play music, and then we do a gallery walk. It's done silently. They're not in conversation. And they're going through and they're looking at their classmates' work, and then they have to write feedback. And so it's a way to practice what does meaningful feedback look like. You can't just put a check mark. You have to describe what you see, offer a praise, and then offer a critique of a challenge, what they should be working on next. And so they are improving their art, but they're also learning how to give their future students feedback. So it's a framework.
So a very big skill, right? To
It's
do that in a way
yeah.
that you maintain the relationship or don't shame anybody.
Exactly. So they're writing their classmates letters, little letters. And those Post-it notes live in their sketchbooks all year. And once a month, we do something called pocket reflections. And they have little library pockets that are in their sketchbooks. And they do a reflection of their biggest takeaways from the month. And they're sharing that with each other as well.
And you have these students all year?
I do. I have them all year for about a little over 2 hours in the morning. During internships, they're in school with me 2 days a week, and then they're out in the field 3 days a week.
So what are some of the changes, challenges, growth that you've seen in education in this particular role in terms of preparing future educators? Because when I was a teacher, I'm so old, there wasn't even like Common Core. There wasn't standardized testing. It was do it, just be with the kids and get it done. And that is not the case anymore.
Yeah. And when I first started teaching, it was the same. I didn't really have any set guidelines. I didn't even feel like I had mentorship in my first school. So I definitely was creating all the curriculum myself, which I love doing, but I often think to myself, what if you really feel unprepared in that regard?
And now my understanding is just kind of almost so rigid. Like the teachers don't have that flexibility. But I'm speaking of ignorance, so I'd really like to hear what you've seen.
I think there's a range, right? And because I'm also teaching grad school and I'm teaching courses in the literacy studies department at Penn, and so I'm also working with practicing teachers regularly as well. So I see what's out there, and there's a wide range of agency. There is a push in many places to kind of take away that teacher agency so that they don't have a lot of freedom in terms of what they're teaching, or they're being told you need to be on the same page, on the same paragraph as the teacher who's next to you. And I have teachers who are in that position. And one of the things we talk about is how can you develop a pedagogy of resistance where you are actually working within and against the system so that you're still meeting all of the requirements, the standards, all of those things, but you are still managing to access children's creativity, and you're still able to build relationships, and you're still able to demonstrate to your students that you care and love them.
But it's also working within an organization. May have different views about.
Exactly. And so that is probably the biggest challenge that I've seen over the last 10 years or even more, since No Child Left Behind Act, where you will have a school who might be quite rigid. I think that so I'm teaching all of those things too, right? Like I'm teaching students about the standards-based movement and the types of things they're going to be asked to do as teachers, and that sometimes that those things might not be aligned with their own personal or professional philosophy. And then how do you actually function in an organization in a way that you feel like you have some agency? I have a lot I could say about that, about the ways that I've done that.
Well, it's so interesting. You have basically teenagers, right? You're at the technical school to veteran masters, people, I guess, working on masters or higher ed. So that certainly keeps you fresh in the field, I would think, seeing it from all different angles. So if someone was considering being a teacher today, what would you advise?
I mean, I believe in public education, so I'm really passionate about recruiting and maintaining future teachers. And I think that if somebody, I'm not even sure that's the right question. If somebody is interested, I feel like we have a lack of interest. I mean, I have 14 students in my program in the morning right now. We used to have upwards of 60 in the program. And so we've seen a drop in enrollment that mirrors the national drop in teacher certifications.
So what do you think that's about? That I'm curious to then lead what you would say to somebody, but why that huge drop off?
I mean, it's complicated, but I think that, at different moments in history, we have different perceptions about education and about the role of the public school and how teachers, the narrative around teaching is often negative. I know that a lot of teachers that I work with, the mentors even, will tell their own children, don't go into education, that there needs to be reform. I still believe in it, so I'm still recommending that people do go. I think you can have a really good life as an educator. A lot of people will complain about the pay or the hours or the amount of work. These are all things that I address and talk about with my students when they think about the challenges that they might face as a teacher. Right now, on the flip side, the positive side is because we have a shortage, the people going into education are going to have their pick. Mm-hmm. They're really going to be able to curate the best scenario for them. So, I'm advocating that my students and my future teachers really interview the schools that they go to see how, what is the philosophy of this particular institution? And does that philosophy align with my philosophy and the type of teacher that I want to become? And does it align with the reasons that I wanted to go into education? They're going to be able to actually determine the best fit for them.
Right, supply and demand.
Exactly. Right. But that being said, we need more people.
So you were saying that's the question you would ask.
Yeah,
why aren't you going?
The question is, why aren't you considering, or you might not have ever thought about this for yourself, but I could see you as a leader. And I approach it from like the idea that teachers are leaders, that they're leaders and they're researchers and they're the people on the front lines who are really making a difference with students' lives. So sort of the noise of politics or institutions or those things, when you're in the classroom with students, there are moments of flow that are so beautiful.
I just feel like if you want to help kids, I then went into social work and I'm like, there's nothing like being a teacher. When you see that child every day, if you really want to make a difference.
Exactly. And so that sustains you. And I think that can be where your happiness lies. And then you can advocate on behalf of your colleagues and sort of step outside your classroom and be a leader in your building and affect change that way as well.
So is it like kind of the messaging? I mean, does that fall back to the schools and counselors mm-hmm. or other teachers encouraging?
Mm-hmm. So the messaging is incredibly important. And I will say that myself and other people in Pennsylvania are very involved in something called Educators Rising, which is the modern iteration of Future Teachers of America, if you've heard of that from way back when. PDK, Phi Delta Kappan, is behind Educators Rising, and their number one goal is the Educators Rising initiative, which aims to recruit and retain young people into the education field. Pennsylvania just recently became an affiliated member of Educators Rising, I think 2 years ago. At Central Montco, we've had a club for the past 3 years, and very proud of my educators. So my Educators Rising students are my secondary education academy students, but we also invite the early childhood education students. So I also have club members who join us as part of that. So we have 18 members.
And what's your role? What do you?
So my role is the advisor, but I'm a teacher leader for Educators Rising, and in Pennsylvania, we have grant money that has been, there's a lot of movement around recruitment of teachers and recruiting for diversity. Pennsylvania is, I think, 94% white female. Mm-hmm. And so one of Educators Rising goals is to recruit for diversity so that students see themselves reflected in their teachers. That's really important as well. That messaging is been part of Educators Rising and also part of what I do recruiting for my own program. Is to talk to kids about becoming the teacher that they never had in their life. I have a number of Norristown students who you might even know them, who are Hispanic, and they are conducting research around the need for more Hispanic teachers. They're writing speeches about the fact that they've never had a Hispanic teacher in their life or a male teacher. And so it's a lot of that kind of messaging that will help recruit more people into the field. Educators Rising is a national organization, and there are many, many state affiliations across the United States, Pennsylvania, as I said, being a new one. There's grant money that has come our way as well. I worked with Dr. Chris Clayton at PSEA, who is the Educators Rising Pennsylvania lead for our state, and worked with him on getting a 3-year grant for Educators Rising curriculum. So I have a 3-year, $30,000 grant that I use in my program that I was really excited that we had been working for a couple of years to get.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, I'm super excited about it. I love the Educators Rising initiative, and I think that is definitely one of the big ways that we're trying to get the word out in Pennsylvania.
And how else are you preparing them? We all talk about the mental health needs of kids now, and preparing and discipline, things like, I want to teach math and convey this information, which just becomes so much more, whether you're the mom or dad, the social worker, the mental health. Do you incorporate that with the
mental health piece?
Mental health discipline?
Yes. So actually, Educators Rising has micro-credentials and that my students have access to. And one is like classroom culture and community, and one is around classroom discipline, and not necessarily discipline, though. It's more proactive than that. The idea of building culture and community in your classroom as a proactive strategy for classroom management.
Do you teach that to all your students, or they choose that?
So right now, my juniors can choose a micro-credential.
Okay.
However, it's embedded across the curriculum because they're also getting an introduction to teaching through Delaware Valley. So they get 6 college credits. English Comp 1 for ed majors. And in that course, they're actually conducting original teacher research, that they're have a research question, they're collecting data, they're conducting interviews, they're presenting that research at the end of the year. And then they do Introduction to American Education through Delaware Valley University. And in that course, they're learning lesson planning, classroom management, culturally competent and relevant pedagogy, all that stuff.
And that's amazing, just to say, because we're in Montgomery County ourselves with TLC, but there's no cost for the student when they're getting these college credits. Like, they're starting out ahead.
So we have a huge discounted college credits. They do have to pay, I think with Montgomery County Community College, which they do their English through, it's $191 for a 3-credit course, which is amazing.
Right. So they're leaving your program with college credits
they
already.
Are.
Yeah.
They also, for the Del Val course, is a little more expensive, but our school actually offers scholarships. So this year, I think 5 or 6 of my students receive scholarships, so they're not paying anything. We always try to work with students to make sure that they have access to the college courses, even if their families can't afford it. We're going to try to work our best to give them access to that. Colonial School District actually is part of the PRIZE program through Westchester University. This is another initiative to recruit teachers in the state. They are so those courses for my Colonial students are free. So they can leave with 9 credits through the PRIZE program, 6 credits through my program. So I have students who are graduating with sometimes over 20 credits.
That's incredible.
Yeah. For very limited cost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can see here, you convey your still excitement and passion for what you're doing. What keeps that going? It's a tough field.
For me, it's the students. It's being, I love being with people who are on the cusp of their life, really. And because they're coming into this program, they've chosen to come into this program. They're excited about exploring careers in education. They don't necessarily know for sure, but they're excited about their future. And I think
you kind of feed on that.
I feed on that. I think it's like, I love, and I've talked to them a lot about college plans. There's a lot to becoming an ed major. Different schools offer different certifications. You can't, if you want to be a high school history teacher, you might not want to go to a particular school because they're more focused on elementary ed.
And you help with your students.
I help do that kind of advising for them. For example, Villanova University didn't used to have any elementary certification. So I think that's actually changing now. But I would have kids who are interested in Villanova, and I'd be like, wait, which level do you want to teach? So there's a lot of guidance and help with getting them to the right place. Yeah.
So at the Lincoln Center, we kind of have a saying, we're a transformational organization, that one moment, one choice, one connection can be transformational in one's life. It sounds like you certainly, knowing or unknowingly, have been that person probably for a lot of students. But can you recall a time in your life, or?
In addition to the moment I already spoke about, which is when I was at the alternative ed school and I had all these disengaged students who really turned me on to the value of integrating the arts. That was transformational because
so it was collective. That
was really collective. And that really led me to really thinking about how students are positioned in schools and how sometimes they are positioned as criminals and sometimes they are positioned as lazy or disengaged. And that experience really taught me to look at students more completely and more humanely. And I think that the arts-based practices that I had, that sort of triggered that for me from that moment forward. But I was already teaching at that moment, so.
But sounds like it was transformational until how you approached it, or have a whole new.
It changed who I was as a teacher. Yeah. It changed how I taught and how I saw students. But a kind of interesting story maybe about how come I even chose, because I didn't major in education in college. I didn't know I wanted to teach. I majored in English and creative writing. I went out to become a journalist, and I was always really curious about people. And but I had a moment where my father and I got our teaching certificates at the same time. So he had a late in life decision to start to teach at the same time that I was also deciding. And I think that was transformative for me. So I could tell you that story.
Yeah. How did you fall into teaching then? I didn't know that.
So my dad worked for NSA for 30-something years. He was a math guy, a code breaker, cryptology. Is that the right word, cryptology, where you code break?
I have no idea.
I think it is. We might need to fact check that.
Yeah.
So he worked for the government, top secret. Like I couldn't go to his office. We couldn't know what he did. We weren't allowed to travel certain places. He was getting called in when any big thing happened, like the Iran-Contra missiles and all of that, Iranian hostages, things like that. And so he was doing that for his whole career. And he was a big runner. He ran 40 marathons, and I would run with him. I would run his warm-up, just the 2-mile warm-up. Right. And we would talk about organizational theory, actually. He was very much into that. And because he couldn't share with me what he was actually doing in his job, we would talk about that. And over time, he started to tell me that he really wanted to teach. And he wanted to teach math, and he wanted to become a high school math teacher. And so he started to go back to school and got his master's in education at GW at the same time that I was going to Westchester University and getting my teaching certificate. So we both did our program together at the same time. We student taught at the same time. He started teaching high school math, and I started teaching high school English. He was well into his career, and I just was like, Dad, why do you want to go teach high school math? Go teach college. And then he did his student teaching. He was like, you know what, you're right. I'm going to go teach college. So he became a math professor and had a full second career at that time. Yeah.
But so what changed from being a journalist to a teacher?
I think it was my runs with my dad and the conversations with him about what did I want to actually do?
Okay.
And I think I was very influenced by my dad, and I respected him greatly. And the way that he was talking about teaching, I was like, his goal was to have people fall in love with math. And my goal was to have people fall in love with books. I think that was
a beautiful bond for you two,
yeah.
Right? Yeah. I didn't know if you were already in your teaching program, but
I wasn't. We kind of started at the same time. I was a young adult. He was, in his career and wanting to make a career shift.
And clearly, how many years later, this was a great choice for you. You found a love of teaching and could incorporate your love of books and writing. But
I think that the thing that was naive was, for him and for myself, was that if you go into teaching because you love your subject, you will find quickly that you can't stay there. Like, it has to be about the relationships with the students. And I think I naively went into my first English class saying, I love these books, you should love them too. But that was all about me, and it wasn't about my students. And I could see that that I was misguided in that.
Who helped you with that? That's a really powerful statement, because people think, yes, I want to share this knowledge. And we've learned it's so much about relationships and education.
Yeah, I think it was when I went to the alternative school. So I taught for 3 years where I had that kind of mindset about sharing what I loved.
Did you have a mentor, or you just kind of figured it out?
I really didn't at the beginning. My mentors were my students. When I left the tech school and I had my daughter, so I was out of the classroom for a little bit. And then when I went back in, I didn't stay out for very long, less than a year. When I went back in, this opportunity to go work at this alternative school popped up. We were brand new. I was there the first year. And it was there that I learned that. I learned very quickly that whatever I thought I knew, I didn't. And that my students were going to guide me. And
it's a vulnerable position. I don't know if teachers that are new teachers feel that confident to defer to the students.
There were a couple things that allowed for that. And I think it was something that you said before, which was when we first started teaching, there weren't really these mandates. And there were not clear boundaries for what I could do. It could be a blessing or a curse, because I could flail and fall apart. Or what I did in my third year teaching was that I embraced it as an opportunity to kind of cultivate how I thought education should be. So I didn't have those, I didn't come up under standardized testing. So I developed a certain kind of creativity and flexibility to my teaching.
And administration then, because there wasn't that mandate, let you do you.
They just let me do it. They were like, go, that's a great idea, go do that. And I think one of the challenges right now that new teachers have is that they don't have that freedom. And so they don't have that flexibility and freedom to fail big, to really fail big with their students. And then
which
I'm
curious, the question that I had or wanted to ask is, if you had a wish or two for public education, what would it be?
It would be to not be so rigid. It would be to allow for to allow teachers to really experience that flow space. I like the idea of engaging. Like, if you had walked into my classroom, especially at that time when we were doing Concrete Voices, the literary arts journal that we created, is that the students were everywhere in the room, and there was so much going on, and you could walk in and think, this is so chaotic. But I think that my administrators trusted me to see what would happen. And I don't think enough of that is going on. I think there's a little bit too much standardization, and too much standardization for what successful teaching looks like.
So if you had a wish, it would be to just step away a little bit from standardized testing, giving teachers more space to be
agency to and to allow them to be the experts in the room, because they're the ones who know the students the best. And so one of the things that has been challenging for my students, and because I'm in my role, I go out and observe them in internships. So I observe a lot of teachers. And I think that the strain of being constantly watched and not trusted erodes at their spirit of why they got into teaching in the first place.
Is it the formal evaluations that have changed? Is it that, or it's just the culture in general, or building by building, or district by district?
It certainly could be district by district, but I mean, I definitely have noticed trends across districts over time of more formal evaluations and less trust in the teacher's ability to decide what is going to work with any particular student at any particular time. There needs to be some kind of balance, right? Like, I wish that I had a website like the SAS portal.
What's the SAS portal?
So that's the standard aligned system that Pennsylvania Department of Education has, where a teacher can go and they can get all these amazing lesson plan ideas and unit plans and it's like this wealth of resources. And I didn't have
And
that.
it's free?
It's free. And it's free for across the United States. It's really wonderful. And it's aligned to all of the standards, right? It's aligned to the Common Core, and Pennsylvania has adopted the Common Core, so everything is aligned. I didn't have that available to me. I'm sure that it would have been incredibly useful to me. But there's also something missing in this idea of creativity and really thinking about who's in front of you and the dynamic that will change from class to class. So teachers need to have the agency and flexibility to run their class how they see fit for any particular group that's in front of them, because the student should be dictating that, not the standard. So you can't do
Which
this.
feels counterintuitive for your standard. I'm going to go to teaching and stand in front of the classroom and deliver this content.
Right. And I think, when you have a standard or a rubric, and this is something that I studied in my research, students will work to the rubric. They will work to the standard. If there's no option for them to go around it or outside of it, the invention is lost, right? So if you tell a kid you need to reach this standard, this benchmark, there could be a kid over here who, if you didn't tell them that, they would go around it and over here and land somewhere that you have no idea where they're going to land. And I think that invention piece is lost when everyone is trying to get to the same standard.
Well said. I understand.
And I think that's what the arts does, right? Because there isn't
That's
one
so
right
personal,
answer.
right? That's
so they might be thinking about a concept that is from the standard, right? Like something related to classroom management, right? And there's a set of things that you can teach them about that. But when they're engaging in the arts around classroom management, every single one's going to have a different perspective on that. And it's going to show up in their artwork, which means that it's showing up in their brain. Metaphorically, they're using different parts of their brain.
really interesting. I appreciate that example. So what are your thoughts about the future of public education?
That's such a big question.
I guess in terms of, I know we could go into AI and all of that.
Yeah, AI is a huge thing that I'm thinking about right now.
So just something that's going to really be transformational in terms of like how do teachers integrate that. And
so, I think my thoughts on AI are nascent. I'm still trying to figure it out at both the high school level and at the grad level that I'm teaching in. One of the things that I didn't mention about the alternative school was that the year that school, I think it was around 2003 or 2002, the middle college was the first one-on-one laptop initiative in Pennsylvania. We were the pilot. And so I was using a laptop with my students when no one else in the state was using them. And so people were I'm witnessing a similar fear with AI that I witness with laptop initiatives. There's pros and cons. It's here to stay. So my approach with technology is always like play with it, embrace it, and figure out how you're going to make it work for you and not the opposite. And so I think I'm having conversations with my students right now about what is AI going to look like in their future classroom, and how is it going to be a tool and not a replacement?
And you're integrating that now, even with your high school students.
I'm just starting to, because I'm trying to figure it out for myself right now of how I can do that. And I think one of the biggest challenges and fears, there's a lot to be afraid of with AI. And but with education, I'm less fearful because I feel like I have an understanding of how to integrate new technology that I learned from having that one-on-one laptop initiative very early on. So I developed that kind of thinking around it.
Do you think it will ever replace teachers?
No, I don't. Because human beings crave human interactions. And the most important thing that I've learned about teaching over the years is that the relationship is the number one priority. So I don't really I know some people have that fear. But one of the things about AI in teaching, though, is you have to train these AI models. And so if you have institutional knowledge like you and I do, we can have a different relationship with AI than, say, someone who doesn't have the institutional knowledge, like my high school kids. My high school kids who are coming up, learning how to teach with AI being on the horizon is going to look very different than me using AI with all of my institutional knowledge and literally being able to train an AI model with my knowledge and my voice, and my understanding, my deep understanding of education that I've had over the years. So I think that that's a huge challenge of what do I do with that? How do I actually help them?
Right, especially as we age out.
As we age out,
yeah.
Exactly.
Do you think it will attract more teachers or deter teachers?
AI?
Yeah, we've talked about, just touched on that briefly, of the shortage of people going into teaching.
That is such a good question. I don't know. I haven't thought about that. I can't see that it would encourage more.
Mm-hmm. So that could be a slippery slope where there's already less interest of people going into teaching. It's going to be, right?
In the same way that we've had to adapt to all technology, we start to figure out what are the things we want to do as human beings and what are the things we are okay with technology taking the place of, right? I know teachers, we have a teacher in my building who is very far ahead on his experiences with AI. He's created AI avatars to teach modules in his program. But that allows him to spend more time one-on-one with all of his students. So I think our roles will shift.
And to your point, the bottom line is it's here. So how do you integrate it, embrace it?
And how do you make it work for you? Not have AI replace you, but how can you have it help you become better at what you do?
And as an educator yourself, educating educators, you're now trying to figure out how you're incorporating that in your teaching.
Yeah. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
I'm struggling with it, but I'm also trying to figure out the best ways to incorporate it.
There's been so much here, Deb. I think we could probably go on and on, like you said, on which thread to follow. But I do appreciate your time today. Is there anything you want to add that I haven't asked?
No, just thank you for having me. And I appreciate your curiosity. And I could obviously talk about education all day. So,
and I love that you, I know you could, because I feel that you still, and I think people sense that you are doing something you really deeply care about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I always tell my students that if you are committed to education, it will make you not only and you're passionate about it, it will make you not only a better teacher, but a better human being, because you have to have that relational component. So I think it's a noble profession that AI can't really replace.
That's a beautiful way to end it. So thank you again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
TLC Connections is supported in part by the Lincoln Center for Family and Youth. Through education, counseling, coaching, and consulting, we empower people to make positive choices, meaningful connections, and transformational change. To learn more, visit thelincolncenter.com.